Hey, this is Rishi from the Growing Club, and today we are in the waste processing center of the growing home. That is our side yard, and what we're looking at is our worm composting bin. And our worm composting bin is where we process a decent amount of our food waste. That's our waste from the kitchen, things that are left over from when we're cutting up vegetables, our actual leftovers. We turn that food waste, such as these banana peels, into this beautiful compost that you see down here. And we do it with worms, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do today. The type of worm bin that I'm going to show you how to build today is what's called a vertical migrating worm bin, which means that we feed our kitchen waste from the top, and from the bottom we collect these rich worm castings without having to separate out the worms. The other part of our worm bin design that's special is that it's made out of wood. These worms, these composting worms, red worms, they have a specific range of temperatures that they do well under. And in the commercial worm bins, the dark black plastic worm bins, those heat up really quickly, and so it's hard to keep them at the temperature that these worms like. Whereas with wood, wood is a natural insulator, and by having a wooden worm bin with a wooden lid, we keep the temperature inside the worm bin very even. And the wood also helps the moisture stay inside the worm bin, which is another thing that the worms need. They need even moisture throughout your food waste composting bin. So that's what we're going to show you how to build. Very simple. It's a weekend project, and I think you'll really enjoy this one. So the first step in building your worm bin is deciding what size is it going to be. The worm bin that we have here is 2 feet long and 3 feet wide. So this is a considerable size. You want to be aware of how heavy this is going to be when it's full of worm castings. Worm castings are very dense and they're very heavy, just as like soil is, so you want to make sure that you're building your worm bin to a size that you're going to be able to lift. And the wood itself is already pretty heavy. So just be aware of that. This is a pretty big size in my opinion. The one that I'm going to show you how to build is much smaller, and it would be for a single or couple to keep in a home or apartment. So before we get started, let's just go over some of the tools that we're going to need and some of the materials that we're going to need. The tools we're going to need are a power drill, a power driver, a sander, if you want it to be sanded, a drill bit set, 1 pair of hinges, chicken wire staples. You can find these at Home Depot or Lowe's or your local hardware store, a few 2.5-inch screws, a few 1.5-inch nails, hammer, and a pair of gloves. To make the actual frames and the lid, we're going to use salvage material. This is all wood we have left over from previous projects. If you're going to build this new, I would recommend you use redwood, because the worms are going to create a lot of microbial activity and they will break down the Douglas fir wood faster than they will the redwood. So what we're going to need are 2 sets of 2x2 lumber to make the lid of the worm bin. So here we have one piece that's 2 feet long and another piece that's 16 inches long. Then we have plywood, which is actually going to form the actual solid part of the cover. Then for each frame, we're going to need 1/2 inch hardware cloth cut to the size of the frame that you're making. So this one again is 16 inches by 2 feet. And then we have the actual 2x4 lumber to make the frame. So this again is, you need one set of each of these for every frame that you make. So here I have 13 inch 2x4, and here I have 24 inch 2x4. So that's going to give me a 16 by 24 inch frame. And we're going to screw those together using these 3 inch pieces of 2x2 that's going to go into the corners. Okay, so those are all the materials and tools that you're going to need to make this. So here is what a finished frame looks like. This is what we're going for. And what you're going to need to do to start, of course, is to cut the wood down to the size that you want. So you're going to need to use a miter saw, and like I've done here, I've cut the wood down to the size I want. The next step is optional, but if you would want to, you're going to sand down the wood that you cut so that it's nice and smooth. That way when you're working with the worm bin, you're not going to get any splinters. Once my wood pieces are all sanded down, the next step is for me to put everything in place and then drill the pilot holes with my drill and my drill bits. So I'm just going to lay this out here. So these are the long sides, this is the short side going inside the frame. And then I'm going to put one of these 2x2 3 inch long rectangles that I cut into the corners. And so what we're going to do is drill into those 2x2 pieces, and that's going to hold the whole frame together. So I've got my 1/8 inch bit on my drill, and I'm going to make 2 holes from either side of the corner into this 2x2 piece of wood. I want to hold everything together really nice and tight, and then go ahead and drill. Now using my driver and a 2.5 inch screw, I'm going to screw through that hole and into that 2x2. Now I'm going to continue, do my other pilot hole down here below the screw I already did, and do the same thing on the other side for the other part of the corner. So now my corner is done. I'm going to repeat that same process to put the other 3 corners together. So now that our frame is put together, the next step is to put the wire mesh on. And again, this is 1/2 inch hardware cloth. And I'm going to attach it to the frame with our chicken staples. And so what I'm going to do to start off is just hammer in one corner of the wire onto the frame. Okay, so I just put the staple in. I want to go across diagonally a few different squares here, and I'm just going to hammer this in. And I'm not going to hammer it in all the way. I still want to have a little bit of flexibility here until I secure one whole side in. Now that my corner is hammered in, I'm going to hammer down one side. I'm probably going to put about 5 of these chicken staples down that side. And the reason I'm doing it this way is so I stretch this wire out as much as possible so it's nice and taut. And this might be a good time to call over a friend or a family member to help you stretch this out, because it can be a bit difficult to get this really nice and taut. So now that one side is in, I'm gonna finish hammering that first nail, so that's nice and taut along that one edge. And now the other side, I'm gonna need to use the nail to actually stretch the wire out. And here again is where someone can be helpful. If you can have someone grab onto these edges with a wrench and just pull while you're hammering it in, so it's very taut. The way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to hammer in at a little bit of an angle, coming back towards me, and then I'm going to bend that nail so that it stretches the wire towards me and it makes this really straight. Okay, so just go ahead and watch how this is done. Okay, so you can see my chicken staple is at an angle. I'm going to start hammering it in at that angle. And when I'm about halfway in, I'm going to hammer it towards me, folding it over so that the wire is stretching out. Now I'm going to continue that same process down this whole edge so that the whole edge is nice and taut. My two edges are now done, and now I'm just going to hammer in the side edges, and we'll be done with the one frame. So that's how you build one frame, and for the total worm bin you're going to need 3 to 4 frames. So here's my 3 existing frames that I already built, and the one that I just built is just going to go right on top of this. And this is the main part of your vertical migrating wooden worm bin. The next thing that we're going to do is build the lid so that it's really easy to deposit your food waste into the worm bin. To build the lid, we're going to take our 2x2 pieces, which we already cut to be the same dimension as the actual worm bin frame. And I'm just going to lay them out on top of the frame, just like that. So we're going to build 2 squares like this. The bottom one is just to hold the hinge. We're going to put a hinge right here, and then the second frame we're going to put on top of this and cover it so that we have a nice hinged lid. To put that square frame together, we're going to make it real easy. All I'm going to do is take a 1/8 inch drill bit. I'm going to drill a hole right here going through one corner into the other, and then I'm going to follow that up with a 2.5 inch screw. And when I do all 4 sides of this, I'll have a nice tight lid. You can see I've raised the lumber up onto some blocks, that way I'm not drilling right on the ground, and so I can get a nice straight pilot hole into the corner here. So let's go ahead and do it. Now I'm going to repeat that process for all 4 corners, and I'm going to do the same thing for the second square part of the lid. Now my 2 frames are together, and so we're going to hinge these together, and we're also going to put a solid lid over one of them. To cover our lid, we're going to use these 2 pieces of plywood, and again, I'm just using 2 pieces because I'm just using my scrap wood that I have laying around, and I didn't have a piece that would cover the whole thing, so I cut 2 different pieces of plywood to make this lid. And again, you can use whatever you have on hand, or if you need to buy something, you can buy something. We just want to cover this completely, and the thicker that this is, the better, so that way there's more insulation. It's going to keep the moisture in here. And now I'm just going to hammer these 2 pieces on. Now that our lid is covered, if you want to, you can sand that down and just make it nice and finished. The last step in the construction of the lid is to put on the hinges so that the solid door hinges up. And so what I've done with the other piece is I've set it atop pieces of plywood that are the same thickness of the lid that I put on, so that this is nice and level. And now I'm just going to drill pilot holes where I want my hinges to go, and then screw them in with the screws that came with the hinges. So you want to place your hinges on the outside edges, but not totally to the edge, and then use the width of a bit that was on the instructions with the hinge that you purchased. So mine said to use a 7/64 bit, and I'm just going to drill these holes here. There you have it, your complete worm bin system. You have your 3 separate layers, and then the lid, which you just can open up and then add food to whichever level of the system that you're adding to. Now let's talk about how to actually start the worm composting process, how this bin will work, and how you can get started turning your food waste into some black gold for your garden. So to start off, you're only going to use one tray that you built. And so what you're going to do is, first you need to create what's called worm bedding. And worm bedding is basically some kind of high carbon material that the worms can kind of set into, and that you can add some of your food waste to. So the high carbon material that we're going to use is newspaper, just plain old newspaper. And first what I'm going to do is just lay down 2 or 3 whole sheets of newspaper on the bottom of this bin. What this is going to do is just, first of all, before we start, prevent the worms and the food waste that we're adding into here from falling through the bottom. The next thing that I'm going to do is take some more newspaper and just shred it into thin strips. And I'm going to add that to the bin. You can shred like one whole daily newspaper in there. The newspaper is all shredded up, and you can see right now, while it's all fluffy, it almost fills the bin. And now I'm going to add just a 1 gallon pot here of some regular compost. So if you have a compost bin a regular turning compost that you manage, you can just take a gallon pot full of that, or you can go to the store and buy a bag of compost. Regular compost is great starter food for worms. So all I'm going to do is just sprinkle that on in here. And that'll just give the worms some really easily digestible food for them to start off with. And that'll help their population really expand initially, so that you have enough worms to eat what you're going to put in. And look here, there's actually a worm already in my compost. And now the last step is to actually add the worms. And so you want to add about 1 pound of red wiggler worms to a worm bin to start off with. Every pound of worms that you have is going to be able to eat about half of their weight in food waste every day. So if you add a pound of worms, initially they're only going to be able to eat a half a pound of food in here every day. And then as that population builds up, the amount of food that your worm bin can process daily will increase. So let's go, I'm going to go get some worms from our already active worm bin, and we're going to seed those worms into this bin. So again, I just emptied out the bottom of my worm bin here a little bit, and in here there are tons and tons of little red worms. It looks like a new batch of babies just hatched. So these are going to be the guys to start off my worm bin. And if you don't have worms already, usually there's someone nearby you who has worms. Check with your local master gardeners or with your local nursery. A lot of nurseries sell worms now. Yeah, you can see in here I got tons and tons of little worms. And even look on Craigslist. People are doing worm composting all over the place now. And so here we go. Here's our worms in here. And then the last step is to, not the last step, but we're getting there. The next step is to add a little bit of food waste. So here, this is again kitchen scraps from our kitchen, some mango peel, some green beans, you know, some little squashes and all this. And we're just gonna add just a bit. Initially, remember, you don't have a huge worm population in here, so you don't want to add a ton of food waste because it's just gonna rot, it's not gonna compost. And now we want to moisten all this down. One of the things that worms must have is enough moisture, and here in Southern California what often happens is if the worm bin dries out too much, then ants will come in and colonize the worm bin. So if you see that there's a bunch of ants in the bin, then you should just add some water to the bin. That'll drive the ants out. If the ants are in there, the worms will start to move down to the bottom of the bin away from the ants. They don't like ants. So here we're just going to water it. Get that newspaper that I added nice and moist. The food waste and the compost that I already added has some moisture in it. So just like that. And then the last step is to actually cover this with a layer of newspaper or paper. I'm going to show you the type of paper that we use. So one of the main issues people have with worm bins is that they'll open up the bin and all these fruit flies will come out in their face. And there's two issues going on there. One is that you're feeding the bin too much. There's too much food. The worms aren't able to break it down, and so flies are coming in and landing on the food and multiplying. So always just feed your worms a little bit at a time. Make sure that when you fed it, that they've eaten up what you previously put in there. So especially initially, you want to start off slow. Then the second thing is you want to have some kind of paper cover. So you can use newspaper. And the thing that we really like that works really well is chicken feed bags. Chicken feed bags are this really thick paper, and it's really hard for the flies to get underneath it, and it also suppresses the smell which attracts the flies. So I'm going to put that in here. If you don't have this, you can even cut a sheet of cardboard so that it fits perfectly inside here. That'll work just as well. So once that's all set up, your worm bin is ready to go. You're going to add your lid to it. So whenever you want to add food now, you're going to open up that lid. You're going to lift up your cover of chicken feed bag or newspaper. You're going to add your food, and then you're going to close this up. So now you're probably wondering, well, what about those other frames that I built? Well, I'm going to show you what's going to happen. So when this first layer has filled up, what you're going to do, you're going to take this top lid off. You're going to take your newspaper or your chicken feed bag cover off. You're going to put on the next frame, the second frame. And now you're going to start filling food waste into this second frame. You can put that chicken feed bag back on, cover that food waste, and then again put your lid on top and start feeding into that second frame. What's going to happen is that as the worms finish eating the food that's in that first layer, they're going to look for more food, and so they're going to travel up into the second layer. And then you're going to add your third layer. And when they finish the food in the second layer, they're going to start moving up into the third layer. By the time the worms have moved into the third layer, so just to give you an example, okay, your worms are doing really well. You got food waste, you've been feeding them for maybe a few months. and all of these bins are full. You're feeding into the third layer. Then you can take these all off. And this first layer will be filled with worm compost or vermicastings, and there will be no worms in here because there's no food left for them to eat. They'll have migrated all the way up to the top, to the third layer, or maybe to your fourth layer if you have a fourth layer. And then you just take this bottom layer out, you take the worm castings out, and now this becomes your new top layer. You just rotate it to the top. So that's why this is called a vertical migrating worm composting system. It's really, really easy to do because you never have to separate the worms from the food waste. They automatically do that themselves. Alright, your worm bin is all ready. You got the worms in there. You understand how it works. Now you just have to figure out where are you going to put this thing. So I'm going to talk about two different situations. One is a situation where you actually have a garden and you have ground space. What you want to do is you want to put this worm bin right onto the soil, because what's going to happen is from the soil other insects, other microbes are going to come in to the worm bin and they're going to help digest the food scraps that you're putting in there, and it's going to actually make the worm composting system move faster, and it's going to enrich it even more because you'll have the poop from all the other insects besides just the worms. The good thing about having it on the ground too is that you don't need to have any bottom. If there's any excess liquid coming off of the food waste, it's just going to go right into the soil, not a problem. If you're in a condo, apartment, balcony, patio situation, then you're going to have to be a little bit different. You're going to need to put some kind of tub underneath this bin, because when you put a lot of food waste in, fresh food waste, liquid may drip off, and you don't want that liquid dripping through the bottom screen and staining your concrete. So put some kind of plastic tub underneath this to catch that liquid. You really shouldn't have too much liquid coming out of here. You're not going to be adding too much water or any water at all to this worm bin, because there's going to be a lot of liquid just from the food waste, and because this bin is totally wooden, that liquid is going to stay trapped in here. If you look at other worm bin videos, plastic worm bin videos, they'll tell you need to add water. Well, that's because that plastic gets super hot and it evaporates the liquid out of the food. And so you have to add water, which means that there's water that drips through and will collect in like a tub. That's not really what's going to happen in this worm bin system. You only need a tub on the bottom to catch a few, maybe drops of water here and there. Otherwise, all that liquid staying in the bin. You also want to, in any situation, you want to keep your worm bin in a place where it's going to not get too hot. The hotter it gets, the more that liquid is going to evaporate, and the worms, they really like a temperature that's between 70 and 90 degrees. You want to stay right there. You also want not to put it in a place that's too cold. So good places to put them: worm bins, west side of any building, so you get the morning sun and the afternoon gets shaded. And the other thing would be under a tree. You know, if you're doing it in your backyard, under a tree where you have some shade throughout the day, but it's still getting the heat from the ambient air. So that's basically it. It's a really simple way of composting your food waste. And again, this is all part of creating that drought resilient garden, because when you create healthy worm compost, that's the best thing to add to your soil. There's so many microbes in worm compost, and that helps the moisture stay in your garden and create a drought resilient system. It creates healthy soil. So this is just one of those first steps in creating a drought resilient garden. I just sat down on my completed worm bin and realized, hey, I just built a bench too. How cool is that? So I hope you like this video. This is going to get you started composting at home, and in a really easy way, and a nice way too. Look how beautiful this bin is that we built. So if you like this video, please support us in making more. Join the Growing Club. We have online memberships available now, and they are tax deductible since we're a nonprofit organization. You know, join the Growing Club, become part of our community, which is spreading these ideas throughout the world and in our local community. If you like this video, then go on to our website, thegrowingclub.com, and sign up for our newsletter and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Thank you and happy gardening!